We keep talking. All right. Now you can keep talking.
Okay. So you want me to do the intro that I did?
Yeah, I mean, you can, or we can keep rolling. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, look, we can keep talking. We were talking about, so I was saying that I just interviewed one of my podcast guests who literally yesterday, she was telling me how she exited her company and it took her 5 years to prepare. They said they call her baby ugly, and it took her 5 years to prepare it for the sale.
Yeah. Right? And that's super interesting because when the end of every private equity conversation that I've had over the last like 6 weeks, and I've had maybe 18 or 20 of them, that's always, what kind of valuation you looking at? And I always go, well, everybody always thinks their baby's gorgeous, right?
Right.
And, I said, but here's the thing that I think makes us unique. We're a small business. We do business in every state and territory. We have a large footprint. X, Y, and Z. We got this big of a backlog. We do this much a year. If I died today, I'm for sure the company can keep growing. And I think that gives us, I was like, I understand we don't get a lot of multiples within the GovCon space, but
right.
I do believe it's worth some multiple, so I'm thinking between, this range and that range, and, I haven't got anybody told me I'm crazy yet. So I think I'm kind of on the right path, but like your friend, I've been looking at Sims for 5 years. I've been talking to these guys for 5 years. I've been talking to M&A guys for 5 years. I've been talking to, friends that tried to exit 2 or 3 times. And then, they do the due diligence. They go, oh, okay, we're looking at 1.3 at, multiple. And then they get a little further down. Well, you have these subcontracts. So we're, now we're looking at a 1.0 multiple. Now we're looking at a 0.8, and so it's really interesting because I think especially the middle market was sort of acquired over the last 3 to 5 years. The Tetra Tech. I mean, all the 50 to 150s, not all of them, but a large majority of them got bought the last 5 years. And so I think that's why the sort of the lower middle market is so popular right now. Like anytime I do a podcast, I'll get 3 to 5 calls from a private equity person that wants a minority stake in a company that's doing 10 to 20 million with, $1 million to 3 million EBITDA. And so I think that, and I think that the reason is because there's just not as many companies in that 50 to 150, mark right now because they were absorbed. And the ones that are there, if they were heavy fed civ, like, I think there's going to be a lot of $20 million companies this year that are going to be $5 million companies next year, unfortunately, and you can kind of extrapolate that on down the line. If you were a $5 million company, maybe you're $1 million company next year, so, I think companies have to be ready to pivot.
So tell us, and going back to that, I mean, kind of how we started the conversation, right? So, what are you seeing out there? You said you've been kind of all over the place looking at what's happening in the market. What are you seeing out there?
The 3 or 4 F's, people are fearful, frantic, or frozen. And I think in this time as owners, as founders, we have to be focused on where the chaos is and the opportunity. There definitely is opportunities out there. But they're not in the same shape, form, rate that they were before. I mean, the mass schedule used to have, 15, 20 things coming out a day. Now you can go a couple of days without seeing anything new on it. So, and then, pretty much all of our pipeline got pushed to the right this whole entire year. Like, we had, at the beginning of the year, we were looking at things and going, oh, we're not going to be able to bid all this stuff in May. We're not going to be able to bid all this stuff in April. And May, nothing came out, So, right. So we had to pivot, and the way we did that was by starting to figure out, looking at it from the government side, they're in the same position. They have less people, less resources. They're being tasked with more. So how do we get innovative and how do we get in front of them and say, like, we understand what's going on and this is how we can help you. And so we've been doing that through unsolicited proposals. And so far we've had some decent feedback. We haven't had any that were, we have 2 that are in the evaluation process. So, if it works, it may be another time I come back and talk to you and say, hey, this really worked, or no, this really didn't work. But that's, when things, there's, I think, a lot of pent up demand. Like if you look at the amount of contracts that have been awarded this year through we're almost through 3/4 of the CR, right? Probably 2/3 of the CR.
Right.
And if you look at how much has been awarded and how much is left to spend, like there's a disproportionate amount there. And so one of 2 things is going to happen: either the administration's counting on that because they're going to take more money, or people are going to try to get stuff out the door starting like July and August, or maybe mid-June. And hopefully it's a pent-up demand that gets unleashed, and we start seeing a lot of things come out. But I don't know if that's going to happen, honestly.
Oh no, look, we want to tell the truth, because I mean, for me, have you? And that's what you wrote in my email. You're like, you've never seen it this way, and it's epic changes. And I would agree. I've never seen it where we did not spend all the money. Like, I mean, isn't that our policy? Just use it or lose it.
That's the whole thing. Like normally when there's cuts, the government cuts a budget, or they cut an agency, and then the agency decides like, oh, we're going to cut some of these contracts, and it flows down, maybe even over a couple of years. But having the government get slashed hard, both in personnel and resources and money, and then I think when I look today on GovWin, there's been 23,000 canceled contracts. So I mean, and some of them are for couches for $1,000, but some of them, the board, my board of advisors, they're with larger companies, and they're like, yeah, we had a $500 million contract canceled. So there's nobody that's sort of shielded from what could be, and I think everybody is sort of bracing for impact in one form or another.
So let's talk about the memo that went out. That's something that you brought up recently. Let's talk about that memo.
Yeah.
So here, this is what it says: lean and mean.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of give people some context. I didn't even know about it because it just it just happened 2 days prior. But tell me about the memo and what kind of implications are we seeing with that?
I mean, I think if you're familiar with GovCon, you're familiar with how many people do IT consulting. And I think, in terms of integrators, 5-10 years ago, GD became GDIT,
Right.
All these companies spun off these other companies to become integrators. And so I think it's going to be a boon for the Microsofts and for the Salesforces and for the people, that they, this defense secretary is talking about hiring directly, but the middlemen, while they may add some costs, served a purpose, because Microsoft didn't want to go into, these little offices and implement, 365 licenses.
Right.
So, for me, it's kind of like, I think at a certain point, they're going to go like, oh, maybe we overcorrected and spun into the barrier here when we hit that black ice. And so, and I think also, like, for instance, when I talk to my friends that are on the other side, I have, a few friends in USAID and some other places that were high level acquisition, or, higher level, GS-15s, 14s and whatever. And, they don't want to go back to work for the government because, the theory is, and we've lost probably, I would say, 75 people over the years that have gotten hired by the government. And every one of their exit interviews the same, is like, I know I'm going to make a little bit of money, but I'm not going to have to worry about my job every 5 years.
Right.
And so when you take away that security and you rip the rug out from under them, and that security is not there, like, yeah, you're getting rid of the seat warmers, and you're getting rid of the people that were just there, but you're also getting rid of a lot of people that were motivated patriots that were, inspired by the mission of their agency. And I think those people are going to be kind of hard to get back, because, they're not going to feel that warm and fuzzy when they go to work, knowing that, they have a job, So I hope that we don't overcorrect so hard that we have a talent drain within the government. And I think even before all this, I mean, I think the common number that I heard a lot was we were short something like 10,000 contracting officers. So that was a number I heard a lot. And, and then you cut GSA by 50%. And then you say, hey, I want all the work to go to GSA, go through GSA. It's kind of like, are you trying to create a huge log jam? Because that seems like kind of what you're doing,
Well, that's funny you say that, because that's what I was thinking, is that how can you be cutting people at the same time and then saying we're going to put all the work through our own workforce that we just cut all the people? So that definitely doesn't mesh well.
I thought the same thing. It was like, I read that and I go, and I'm thinking about my customers, my core, the surrounding support staff of my customers. Some of our customers we've had 10, 12 years, right? And I go, I know everybody that's in that office. I know everybody that's at that post. They're not going to know how to do that, right. So, and if there was someone that did that, they're not there. And so,
right.
It seems like a good recipe to bring the government to a grinding halt. And that's kind of what I'm seeing, just in terms of, opportunities that are coming out, and even opportunities that are still live. We're still doing a lot of capture. And, like my business development guy, I get CC'd on the emails when he's reaching out about an opportunity. And it's like, 8 out of 10 are like, sorry, that got canceled by Doge. We're like, well, then why didn't you say that on SAM, Right. But it's kind of like, again, they're fearful, frantic, and frozen. They don't know what's coming next. A lot of dollars that were allocated, are not making it to the places in which they were allocated for. And there's been a couple personal examples I have of that, just within our own contracts. But and we're still thinking that, okay, the funding's going to come through. It was allocated, but maybe it's just, stuck in the system somewhere because the person that used to push that button isn't there, and so it's interesting to see all of these things happening at once. And it's like, you don't necessarily know what all the entire blowback's going to be from all these things that have sort of unintended consequences.
So you were talking beforehand that you said, hey, that you were getting ready to do an acquisition, and so you're looking at tariffs and all these things because they could impact your acquisition. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. I mean, the acquisition that we're doing, is there's a manufacturing component, and then there's a training school component. And so, it's not that they order massive amounts of steel, and most of their vendors are American companies, but I don't know how many of those American companies buy China from steel. Like we didn't, we haven't dug that deep into diligence yet. That's our next part. We've got the letter of intent signed. So that's kind of our next phase of diligence. And that's where I'm going to kind of be really digging in to see, like, okay, how dependent are we, do we produce enough steel here, to get these contracts done? So it's going to be interesting. And, then on the counter to that, there's also a lot of incentives for manufacturing now too. So, we're trying to dig into that as well, and see if, okay, maybe we start, some of the things that maybe we were, subbing out to vendors to get, pre-made before they got to us. Maybe we'll open up another plant and make those things ourselves just to get the, the benefits. Because there are some, from what I understand, really nice tax benefits to starting a manufacturing right now, including, being able to amortize the entire building, the entire thing in the first year.
I was about to pull that up so you can see it. That's exactly what I mean. I literally just sent that to a buddy of mine because I'm like, hey, he builds boats, yachts. He builds ships. And I go, have you seen what they put in there for shipbuilding? But also, back to your point, and I'm pulling this up, they're putting a lot of dollars in training for people that could work in the manufacturing space. So it's not just here. Let me see if I could pull this up on the screen, but it's give me a second. I literally sent this to a friend of mine, and it says resource shipbuilding. So 250 million expansion to accelerate training in defense manufacturing programs. So I think you are right up your alley with what you're talking about there in that space. And also in the manufacturing, I read that as well, where, like you said, for the tax purposes, to set up a manufacturing facility, you could essentially,
you get massive tax benefits.
Right.
The only thing that I wonder, and the thing that concerns me is that all these things are happening, and we're 18 months away from a lame duck president, and will there be enough time for him to implement all this stuff and for it to take effect and for it to work before people don't care what he thinks anymore? And I'm hoping that there's enough there's enough momentum and enough trajectory and these things have started to work by then. So that way, we don't just hit a U-turn as soon as, the next 4 years happens. But, but it's another big risk that comes along with all the riskiness that's already risky within the.
That's hey, that's what we signed up for. That's what we signed up for. I mean, one of the things that I can tell you is when they create the Opportunity Zone program back during the first time Trump was in office, I have several friends of mine that significantly benefited from that program. And, it continued on through the next. Now, they didn't push that, they didn't put a lot of resources so people didn't talk about it, but it still was there and it still existed in its current form. So I'm hopeful that, like you said, whatever things are being put in place continue to exist even through the next administration. But
I'm
right, we don't know.
I'm hopeful too, and I think, and again, like I think while there's a lot of companies, that I think there's going to be a massive thinning of the herd, unfortunately. However, I think that, like Circuit City and Best Buy, I think it's going to create a lot of opportunity for some and, and maybe be a death knell for some others. But I think, in order for it to be an opportunity, you have to be creative. You have to be imaginative. You have to be able to think, think ahead and think, okay, if I'm sitting in an agency and I just got tasked with this thing, then, and my buddy on my left and my buddy on my right's not here and I got half the money, how am I going to do it?
Right.
And
right.
so, and that's something that the message that I've sent out to our people that are on contract is like, I know everybody's scared, but like, let's take a look around and see where, we can be innovative, where we can apply technology, where we can apply, innovative out of the box thinking, because if there was ever a time to do it, it's now. They're rewriting a lot of the FAR, they're making things get done a lot faster through different, procurement methods. So, and they're, and hopefully, that will stay, because I think part of our problem in terms of competing with, our international foes, including China, is that our process just takes too long.
Right.
And by the time something, whether it's an SBIR or whether it's a contract, whatever, right. It just takes way too long. They've already done it and failed 5 times and have already gotten to the next thing,
Right.
So, I'm always optimistic, but right now I'm cautiously optimistic.
What prompted you to want to come on and even talk about this?
Oh, it's just interesting and fun. I mean, like I said, there's never been a time like this since I've been in contracting where both the government side and the contractor side were on the same boat. I'd never been getting calls from both government employees and people that were at larges and owners that are as small as, and everybody's, kind of in this like what in the hell are we going to do next?
Right.
And so, fortunate for us, knock on wood, we haven't, really suffered any losses, and, we've continued to win. We picked up we won some work last year that was protested. And so it started at the beginning of this year, and, DOJ went through all our contracts already. So I feel like, knock on wood, we're sitting in a safe space. And then, launching a buy side campaign, I feel like was a smart thing to do, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of companies that are $20 million companies this year and are going to be $5 or $6 million companies next year. So hopefully, being able to, if I was an owner and I had a $20 million company and I was looking to retire and my portfolio got decimated, I would be looking for some sort of safe harbor, and that's kind of what we're trying to pick up is those companies that, have the Oasis Plus, they have the vehicles, they have the people, but the owner just doesn't have it in them to rebuild again. I mean, I'm sure you've talked to so many government contractors that have had to rebuild numerous times. I've had to do it. I've gone from 15 million to 3 million to 12 to 6, so I mean it's never a straight line, but you have to have that wherewithal to want to rebuild and to be able to regrow and think about things in a new way. So that's kind of what we're looking for is people that we could offer that opportunity to. Maybe it's a smaller bite of a bigger apple a little bit down the road.
So speaking of that, I this book, Thinking Right Out of a Ditch, okay? This guy, Abe Abraham, all right? I don't know if you ever heard of it before. Probably not. It's not a popular book. So this happened to him in the 90s, okay? This is not new stuff. I tell people, he won a contract, right? He became a large.
Yeah.
Then he lost the renewal. But because the way the rules are written, he still was large based on his 3-year returns, but he didn't have the resources. So he could not compete for small business because he was large.
Yeah.
So imagine trying. So that's why it's called, thinking your way out of a ditch, because he was like, okay, wait, I don't have the resources to be large, even though I'm large by definition. I can't compete for small contracts because I'm large. And that's exactly what you said. That was his story, except he went the opposite. He went high and then he lost it. So then he's back low on money and resources, but he's considered high by eligibility standards.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because, some of the people that I've talked to, are like, why do you want to buy a company? Why are you trying to do this right now? Like, you could live a very good life as a $25 million a year company. You could live a very good life as this. And I'm like, well, that's not what I want to do. So I think, number one, I always tell smalls and people that I mentor and people from, the different boards I'm on, you have a distinct advantage when you're small and you're bidding full and open. If you are qualified, you have a tremendous advantage of agility, of price. I mean, as long as you can, and another thing I always tell people is once you have the contract, people will be running to give you money. Like I want, I won the $50 million award that I won in 2015 with a $49,000 prime pass performance, and I had, the thing was we had good subs that had the scope, the size, scope, and complexity, and they as the procurement went along, everything kept going our way. Like they weighted sub pass performance the same as prime. Like all these things just lined up for us. And so, however, when we lost it, okay, well, now we got to scale back down. We went from 5 to 120, then we lost 67, I mean, so you just you have to be able to, number one, I think, put your pride aside when you do have a dip and go, okay, well, I always tell people, grow out of things, don't grow into things. Don't go get the big office, thinking you're going to get the next big contract, because, you want to grow out of things. You don't need something just because a large had it. Like, you don't need to do, it's like that old Comcast commercial where the two guys were sitting, with the desk facing each other. And the one guy was like, oh, this is HR. And, this is, it's just two guys, with different lines.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times smalls try to do that. They try to be a lot larger than they are. And, if you do hit a big contract, yeah, you should, there's certain things that you're going to need to execute that contract, but you don't need to go out and, all of a sudden be spending $50,000 a month on an office. You don't need to, hire all kinds of crazy people. The refrain that I heard at HBS a lot was, you want to be as mature as you have to be. Not as mature as you want to be in terms of your services and your capability, but as mature as you have to be in order to execute what you want to execute and continue to grow. Because if all of a sudden you're over mature and you have all these extraneous processes, I've been in meetings with companies that were $25-30 million companies that had 22 process gate process, 20 different gates, and I'm like, how in the hell do you ever even bid anything? We have 4, and one of those is proposals, and one of those is won, lost, or canceled.
Right.
It's like identify, capture, proposal. Whatever. So, so I think a lot of times, small businesses trip up because they try to be a lot more mature than they need to be, and they start incurring a lot of costs that they wouldn't normally have occurred had they not tried to be bigger than they were.
I love it, Michael. Well, listen, hey man, I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you coming on all the time and sharing your insights. And if you have something else that comes up, we got to jump on. Let's jump on the horn. I want to get this thing out this week. I want to get this out this week.
I'll let you know when my acquisition's done, man. I'm heading to South Carolina this week, and then I'll be in Guam at the end of the month for a week. So I'll give you a call when I'm out there if there's anything.
Give me a call. Yeah, give me a call. Hit me up. Text me, brother, and then we'll catch up. All right.
All right.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you, brother.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Talk to you soon, buddy.
Talk soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.